Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 18 of season 1 of Babylon 5, A Voice in the Wilderness, part 1. Yes, a two-parter towards the end of season 1 of the show. It's a pretty ballsy move, isn't it? This one I do remember, and it's definitely an arc episode. Let's find out why, shall we? A mature-looking Minbari male arrives onto the station and asks the security guard for directions to Ambassador Delenn. He's a nice chap. It looks like he's going to take him there. No idea if that was pre-arranged, but very good of him if it wasn't. In C&C, Ivanova and Sinclair are discussing some seismic disturbances on the planet they're in proximity to, which is called S01E18. Although not mentioned here, the station is at a Lagrange point, so wouldn't need much in the way of station keeping thrusters to keep it in position, and the station is in the Epsilon Eridani system, which is a real star system. The disturbances seem to be declining, but are still ongoing, so a shuttle is going to be sent down to have a look. Sinclair leaves to look after diplomatic matters as the shuttle launches. He finds Talia waiting for a lift, looking perplexed. He asks if there's a problem. She says that every time she tries to take a lift, Garibaldi is somehow there. Sinclair says he's many things, but not omniscient. The lift arrives, with a grinning Garibaldi aboard. Talia and Sinclair take the stairs. The survey team approach the planet's atmosphere in their shuttle, possibly the first time we've seen one, as most traffic in and out of the station isn't capable of atmospheric flight. As they start their scans, some sort of beam blasts past them from the planet, shorting out their systems and leaving them tumbling into the atmosphere. We can see the beam from the station's orbit and it hits their systems too for a moment. The shuttle has established a low orbit, but will need star furies to help it get back. Two go out and we get a nice shot of them returning to the Cobra Bay for recharge later. Between times, Sinclair notes to Delenn and Londo that none of the planetary surveys ever turned up indications of Epsilon-3 being inhabited, and Delenn says maybe not now, but in the past perhaps, with Londo speculating that they may have awakened something. Ivanova is somewhat bemused by the returning scientist's eagerness to get back to the planet, despite the leader admitting he's scared to do so. But, science good. Sinclair's diplomatic efforts conclude successfully, with the Centauri and Minbari reaching an agreement regarding trade routes. Londo notes that this has been a far more reasonable negotiation than he's used to, as normally he faces off with Jakar, of course. When Delenn notes that Jakar is often angry and says that fades with time, Londo laughs and suggests that it is mathematically impossible for the Narn and Centauri to stop hating one another. Action, reaction, cause and effect. Ivanova and Sinclair discuss the slightly faded signal which appears to be a comms beacon. Ivanova notes that there's been no communication about Mars that day. Normally there would be, but there's been no word about military exercises that might normally cause such a communications blackout. She'll make arrangements to get the science team back to the planet in the morning. As she heads back into her quarters, Delenn meets the Minbari who boarded earlier. His name is Dral, an old teacher who she's clearly very fond of, and who quizzes her by way of greeting. They've even colour-coordinated their outfits. It turns out that there is a revolt happening on Mars against the provisional government appointed by Earth. Sinclair listens to the ISN news with concern etched across his face. Mars isn't terraformed, it seems, and domes are visible on the news. The on-site reporter's signal breaks up as he reports on the day's events with sounds of firefights happening in the background. And as Sinclair turns the monitor off, he hears a voice asking for help. As he turns to the source of the voice, he sees a flickering image of an unfamiliar alien. It fades as he's left wondering whether or not he imagined it. Ivanova and Sinclair discuss Mars over breakfast, and we learn or are possibly reminded that he was born there. So neither of them know anyone there now, but Garibaldi is taking it hard because he does have people back there. Sinclair is going to try and check on him later. A half-truth is the worst type of lie. Delenn's reminded to her teacher of his teachings when he gives her a half-baked reason for his visit. Interestingly, he's told her about her family on Minbar, first mention of her having relations. He explains that he's become uncomfortable with the feel of Minbar, that something has changed there beyond the obvious tension between the religious and warrior castes. The people are lost, angry, and he wishes to go to the sea. Delenn is clearly taken aback by that and says that he is not that old, but it seems he wants to end his life away from Minbar, and that the path he is on will mean that he does not see her again. It's unclear exactly what he has in mind, but the possibility of him ending his own life, but not just yet. Garibaldi breaks the mood as we see him trying to get a clear channel to Mars and failing miserably. I didn't remember this aspect of the episode, but it did come back to me. He has no joy with this, but he seems to have a backup plan as he leaves his quarters. Ivanova is sending the science team out with a Star Fury escort this time, but reminds them that the Furies are not rigged for atmospheric flight. If they go down into the atmosphere, they're on their own. Sinclair heads to CNC to observe the flights, happily telling Londo that if they find anything of value, he won't tell him. The escort wing takes off more than Earth Force One and the Asimov had, if I remember rightly. Garibaldi catches Talia away from a transport tube for once, but this time it's urgent. His last posting was on Mars, and there he met a woman called Lise Hampton. It was serious, and there was talk of marriage. However, when he took up the Babylon 5 position that Sinclair offered him, she didn't want to come with, and it ended badly, and they haven't spoken since, but he's wanted to. Talia does listen. It turns out Garibaldi knows of the Centre on Syria Planum, a Psychor base that's supposed to be classified. He's asking for Talia's help to get them to relay him into the local comms network. She considers and says that she'll do what she can. She's his last hope. It's a nice scene, and you can see why these two hooked up in real life a little here too, I think. The lead scientist doesn't listen to Ivanova and dips into the atmosphere to get samples, which of course is a bad move. The shuttle is targeted by surface-to-air missiles and hit by one. More missiles are launched as the shuttle struggles to climb. Ivanova orders the Furies to fire down into the atmosphere to distract the missiles from the shuttle, whilst ordering the shuttle to kick in its afterburners and boost to orbit in the hope that the missiles can't go extra-atmospheric. The gamble pays off, but Ivanova is not impressed with the science crew. She says that on the way back they should learn the Babylon 5 mantra. Basically, Ivanova is God. She then apologises to God, saying she was kidding. Possibly not so much about the ripping the science team's lungs out if they disobey her again. The science guy's conclusion is that the missiles came from a fissure 5 miles deep, possibly opened up by the seismic activity, but originally artificial. Previous scans had only gone 2 miles deep, so that's why nothing had shown up before. As far as they know, it's just an automated defence system, no sign of life. But what's it defending? Sinclair and Ivanova agree it's a potential first contact situation, which they're both clearly very happy about, as they're normally stuck on a space station. Londo sees that Garibaldi is having a tough time, drowning his sorrows in H2O. Londo doesn't touch the stuff. He recounts a tale of when he was down in the dumps, and retells the moral of the story to Garibaldi now. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. The giver of that advice to Londo, a dancer, he married that very day. While this does cheer Garibaldi up, he finds himself footing the bill for Londo's drink. Always has to be something in it for the Centauri. On the way back to his quarters, the alien Sinclair saw appears to Londo in a deserted corridor, again asking for help. Ivanova and Sinclair are making their run for Epsilon 3's chasm. As expected, they're fired on by the defence system, but the Furies are standing by to give cover fire again as the shuttle burns for the fissure. Sinclair hopes Tasiki was right about the depth of the chasm, because their speed means Sinclair is going to need 2 miles just to slow down. Some really great CGI here as the shuttle comes down, switches on lights, ignites landing thrusters. It's clearly rigged for vertical takeoff landing, and we see terrain radar graphics as well on the control panel as they go in. And they find a landing pad a long way down. Gravity is 3/4 Earth normal, and a distinct lack of oxygen means they're going to need breathers. Talia gets through to Mars, but they won't do what Garibaldi was asking for. It seems it's the Free Mars movement, who we've heard of, that are behind the insurrection, much better organised and better armed than had been believed according to the Psycho operative Talia was speaking with. Although she won't give Garibaldi direct access, saying paranoia is not unreasonable in the circumstances, she does say she will try and look for Lisa's name in casualty lists. Sinclair and Ivanova are investigating on the planet, moving down a darkened tunnel with X-Files style flashlights. Yes, it's Babylon 5, but not on Babylon 5 anymore. Who knew? They're not the first to visit. A long dead alien corpse is on the floor in a corridor. If you're thinking Akbar, you'd be right. It's a trap. Pretty nasty one too. However, its lethality takes power, and it has to recharge between shots, as Sinclair's stone throwing demonstrates. Sinclair and Ivanova make their window and sprint down the corridor with the beams lighting up behind them. They end up on the floor, but unscathed, and move on. Indiana will be proud. And then they find the mother lode. A vast cavern filled with moving alien machinery stretching out below and above them as they stand on a walkway. It's a long way down, and both profess a need to have a comfort break. Delenn introduces Dral to Londo as her mentor and teacher. Londo has apparently been analysing the Hokey Pokey, I thought it was Hokey Cokey, for 7 days to determine its cultural significance, but has yet to find any meaning to it whatsoever, despite it being passed down through the generations of Earth children. Great performance by Londo. Garibaldi is getting concerned about the away team on the in the command and control center when Talia comes to speak with him. Psi Corps couldn't access the list of dead or wounded, but at least it isn't on the survivors list either, so her fate is uncertain at best. Garibaldi refuses to believe the worst. A signal finally comes through from Epsilon 3, and as Sinclair is telling Garibaldi what they've seen, the Babylon 5 scanners report quake activity again, and Garibaldi urges them to clear out. It's too late. The way is blocked by a ceiling collapse, but the alien figure appears again, and this time turns at a junction, seemingly indicating the path to take. Both officers acknowledge seeing him, and Sinclair mentioned that he saw him on the station. And they find him for real now, nestled in the centre of a spider's web of equipment with a pulsating light behind. He opens his eyes briefly and says they must help him or all their people will die. Not good. They pull him out of the machine and find their way back to the shuttle, returning to the station with the Furies providing cover again. Garibaldi orders a med team to meet them on arrival and is told his ship is coming through the jump gate, a big one. The jump sequence activates and we cut back to Mr. Garibaldi saying, "What the hell?" As "to be continued" comes up on the screen. So that's the end of this first part of this two-parter. This is a genuinely action-packed episode, and the pace doesn't let up. Beyond that, though, we still get some very poignant moments with Delenn's mentor and Garibaldi being very open with Talia about why he needs their help. Both these add further depth to the characters, and we see a softer side to Talia than perhaps we have done in the past. The CGI, as I mentioned, is very convincing and cleverly used to add detail inside the ship environments. It could easily have been a demo for every science fiction series that followed, and rendering space is one thing. This is a whole CGI planet here. Moreover, this is the first time we've seen the characters off Babylon 5 and outside a ship, which is a major extension for the setting of the series. Epsilon 3 is often compared with the interior of the classic Forbidden Planet films installation, and there are certainly echoes of it here, but no id monster prowling around that we've seen so far, just the high-tech equivalent of blow darts coming out of the walls at you. Quite how an intruder got in there first, I'm not sure, but of course it does serve as a very handy warning sign for our heroes. If Oliver's Babylon 5 mantra speech is a classic, it's almost worth watching the episode just for that piece of Claudia Christian acting. Comedy impact, but bordering on deadly serious. Londo struggled to decode the philosophical meaning of the hokey pokey is also brilliant. It does not mean a thing! as is Delenn's quiet plea to Dral not to tell Londo that he liked the song. It's good to learn more about her upbringing too. It seems that Dral is probably a significant influence on the way Delenn views the universe, so as a member of the Grey Council that's no small thing. And we are, after all, largely the product of our upbringings. We also see some nice Garibaldi-Londo interplay here as well, and we've seen these two bounce off each other before and have something approaching an affection for one another, if not an out-and-out friendship. There's always that nagging doubt, though, that Londo is going to collect the debt at some point. So, of course, the big revelation is that Babylon 5 is hovering above a vast alien structure of undetermined purpose, and they've just unplugged someone from it who needs help, otherwise bad things are going to happen. Why? We don't know. We also know that something big is about to come through the jump gate, but again, we don't know what, and we don't know if Garibaldi's lover is alive, hurt, or dead. We also don't know why the alien was appearing to particular people on the station. It's most definitely a case of stay tuned for next week's episode. Now, Star Trek The Next Generation did on occasion do two-parters that weren't end-of-season cliffhangers, but it was unusual. And I can't think of any that happened before Babylon 5. I could be wrong about that, I'll grant you. For Babylon 5 to do this towards the end of its first season, and suddenly throw in an alien complex and atmospheric shuttles with missiles flying at them in a single episode, when none of that had been hinted at before, is a massive gamble, I would suggest. Unless, of course, you have a plan, which of course JMS did have. This episode was produced quite late in the overall order, and you can imagine why. The shuttle cockpit is a new set, they needed physical sets for Epsilon 3 to some extent, so that prep work had to be happening in order for it to be ready for this episode, which means it wasn't done on the hoof. As this was an arc episode, JMS would have had this in mind from the outset. Notwithstanding the planning element, it also effectively takes what you thought the concept of the show was, screws it up into a ball, and throws it into a bin with a jump point in the bottom of it. We see footage from Mars. The crew go onto the planet the station's been in orbit of forever and are suddenly in a completely different environment without any forewarning. And this was just the first part of the two-parter. As intense as Stein's importance was, this is the key turning in a lock that opens a door into a much wider universe than just Babylon 5. Now we begin to realise that while Babylon 5 will of course always be a focal point for the show, it doesn't necessarily start and stop there. It's going to be bigger than that, and braver than that. And having the story ready actually helps with that, because it means you can do that expansion in a coherent way over time. Groundwork is laid, now we can start building properly. I'll talk in another video about this season as a whole, but suffice to say that it gets somewhat dismissed because of what comes later, in terms of the later seasons. Some episodes are weaker than others, certainly. Yet this is fundamentally what it's all built on. This is the proof of concept for the story, and this is the type of episode that demonstrates the potential of the show, I think. Okay, time for a drink. I think I've done a lot of talking this week as a whole. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you for the conclusion of this two-parter next week. Bye for now.